Well, hello everybody. Welcome to the Two Stewards Show. My name is Mark. I'm here with Brent.
Hey, Mark.
And we have an extra special guest today. We always have a special guest. I don't know how to delineate that, who's really special. But for me, this is a pleasure. We have Sam Cooper with us, and welcome, Sam.
Great to be here, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, great to have you here. So Sam Cooper, for those who don't know, at Scooper Cooper, and I think that's because he always has the scoop. Sorry, I got to get dad jokes in there right away. But at Scooper Cooper on X or Twitter. So Sam, I came across your work initially through your book Wilful Blindness, and I was willfully blind. I grew up in Canada. Kind of just a regular childhood, into adulthood, really unaware of a lot of what you have been talking about. And even after having read your book, Wilful Blindness, which is about Chinese influence in Canada, I still wasn't really aware of the depth of the penetration of foreign interference in Canada until some of your more recent reporting. And I got to say, I really don't enjoy your reporting. Not because it's not good. It's good, but I just, I hate reading it.
Yeah. It's troubling.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, quick background on you, Sam. You're an investigative journalist. You started off, I think, with Global News, or, recently you're with Global News, and now you've formed your own office, the Bureau. And you do investigative journalism that way, ostensibly unfettered by editorial influence. Is that right?
Well, yeah, I actually started with Vancouver newspapers, Vancouver Sun and Province, and I have 20 years in the business, very often working with lawyers and top editors. So I figured after doing Wilful Blindness and it being an international success and cited by, very credible government sources around the world, that I had inbuilt all the sort of editorial and legal wisdom that I needed to push out on my own for the Bureau.news. And it really is about, writing what I think is needed internationally, not just on Canada. And it's been going great so far. Yeah,
that's excellent. So I should set the stage a little bit for our listeners. We talk about stewardship. And in this case, I think we're talking about stewardship of Canada. We have a country that is, and I've talked about this before, we're rich in resources and we don't use them, but we're also rich in so many other ways. We have a rich heritage, we have a democracy, just like so much potential in this country. And through Sam's reporting, among others, we see how that's being co-opted, and especially by the Chinese Communist Party. And, this is not, I think we're past the point where if you talked about China, well, that's racist, right? I think we're all adults and we can agree, no, there are countries in the world with their own agenda, and they're influencing Canada, and it's been proven. And I think we can get past that. There's other players as well, but the influence of China has been it's been eye-opening to read about it. We'll put it that way. So, okay, let me set the stage quickly for our listeners with just maybe a few acronyms. So we have CSIS, which is the Canadian Security and Intelligence Services. Correct me if I'm wrong on these, Sam. NSI COP. Then I believe it's the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians.
Correct.
So yeah, this is a group of MPs, a bipartisan or tripartisan, whatever group, who report on security matters. And they've had some reports that came out lately. One, very troublingly, I don't know if that's a word, troublingly, but I'll use it, reported that in 2019, anyways, we had at least 11 sitting MPs and senators that were either witting or unwitting agents of influence. So by foreign countries, and that was 2019.
I'll correct you on that one, just because I'm the one that that report had to look into the reports that I made, and there was such a firestorm. And it's actually 11 MPs in the Toronto area alone were implicated in a Chinese sophisticated election interference ring. Some of them allegedly much more knowingly involved, and some of them semi-wittingly is what they say, whatever that means. So yeah, it's 11 in Toronto, and as I say, not to get off topic, it's much greater across Canada, and there's more countries than China involved trying to influence our MPs.
So you're
for sure.
So Sam, you're looking into foreign interference in Canada, and I'm new to this stuff. Mark's read your book, I haven't, so I full disclosure, and I think a lot of our listeners probably haven't yet either. But how do you go about doing that?
I mean, it's become almost a life pursuit at this point. And the short story is, like Mark said, I grew up educated in Canada's system, basically to believe we're a fairly solid democracy and we don't have these third world corruption, third world, issues where you've got organized crime working with, generals and police sergeants to do some serious drug trafficking and guns and kill people. But I found out, it took years, over a decade, but being a young reporter in Vancouver, I naturally just started to dig into the real estate market and find that it was crazy. The prices that were, on homes were not supported by local incomes, which were pretty low. And it was very clear that international dirty money was behind it. And so I won't, drag that out, but that's what led me into finding that international organized crime with connections to countries, especially China and Iran, if we're talking about my journey in Vancouver, were behind a lot of that dirty money flooding in. So I started with real estate and its impacts. And then I just got into how that, got into political corruption, got into organized crime and how funds from organized crime are used to fund election interference. So that really condenses my journey, but it starts with following the money, which is the classic sort of journalism.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to touch on the real estate thing quickly, was this affecting just my perception anyways, is that it just affected sort of the high end of the real estate market. Is that correct? Or were there knock-on effects to sort of homes that what you and I could afford?
Yeah, no, I mean, it absolutely starts at the high end and goes from top to bottom. So that's another thing, I was very clear with people, being a young, what I call young at that time, family man. I was just part of a generation that was year by year getting priced out, and I started to write about this, and it caught the eye, I remember, of a well-known US sort of hedge fund veteran that was saying, he contacted me, there's something crazy going on in Vancouver and you're onto it. But to your question, I mean, you started to see homes that are really not that special. They're something that in any North American city would be valued at around 400, 500,000, but they were going for 2 million plus in Vancouver. So that's the low end where a family, of course wants a little yard so their kids can run around. That was out of reach in Vancouver. So those kind of, we'll call them starter homes, are, 1.5 million plus. You go into a nicer area of the city, they're about 4 million. And, at that point, they're just knocked down and, mansions are built to the extent of the lot. And those become, your $6 to $15 million properties.
Oh, man.
And by the end of the day, it becomes clear, as I found out, that, the city is largely owned by drug traffickers. I can't put it any other way. Drug money flowing in is being used to just build, and that's pushing up prices. And we saw it in certain spurts. You'd see prices go parabolic, 1 year, and it would, it was pushing out further into the suburbs. So it's not just impacting the high end, it was across the board. And I can literally say that, I became one of those people that made the family choice that I was going to move to another part of Canada, strictly for affordability reasons. And I believe I can also say that what we're seeing in Toronto and Vancouver has now already impacted other cities. So out in, Halifax, New Brunswick, where people moved, now they start to see the prices going up. So it's a whole chain effect across Canada, I believe.
I got a lot of questions. So why Canada? Like, why? I mean, you saw it in Vancouver. I don't know if at the time it was happening in other places across Canada. That's where it started. But why Vancouver? Why Canada?
Yeah, this is a question that it took me a long time to get to the bottom of, but I believe I have. So we again, this goes back to none of us is taught in school that Canada was deeply susceptible to international organized crime, which was becoming a force for real estate development, especially in cities like Vancouver and Toronto. Vancouver being just essentially, if I use my hands a bit to make a kind of graph here, like money was flowing from Hong Kong, Macau, and coming to not get ahead of it. They termed this the Vancouver model, but China being that reservoir of incredible wealth that is sort of locked into the communist system, it goes underground into Hong Kong and Macau via, casinos, real estate, and it was just hitting Vancouver like a fire hose underground. So that's why Canada, just strictly on the real estate question, and because our, starting with Pierre Trudeau, our senior, in their wisdom leaders said, we're going to have Canada will be an Asia Pacific based economy. So we were welcoming in all that mystery money. And no one was talking about, how it was flowing through organized crime fully. And that's what my work exposed, with Wilful Blindness, the book, and, media reporting. And so the short answer to your question is we lack laws like the United States has the Anti-Racketeering Act. And anyone that likes to read or watch, mob movies knows that, of course, the U.S. had a big problem with the Italian-based organized crime or community organized crime, and they realized it. They cracked the heck down on it with very tough laws. In the same way that I've found Japan had a deep problem with their Yakuza, which was just infiltrating all levels of society, becoming a government in itself. And they had to crack down and did. Canada hasn't yet done that. So that's why Canada.
Well, and I guess that's hence the title of your book, right? Willful Blindness. Like, there's something going on. And it's just like, I can't see it. So if I can't see it, I don't have to do anything about it. But so first of all, I want to say, like, everything that you're saying or that you have said thus far, like, it's backed up. This isn't just like Sam Cooper, some guy in his mom's basement, like coming up with these theories, right? Like, do you have sources? A lot of your stuff has been cited by governments, by NSI Cop, backed up by folks in like U.S. intelligence. Like, can you just outline maybe a little bit better, sort of that tunnel of money and, we can use China or Iran, but I think China is a good example. Like, how does the money actually get here and who's behind it? Because you've also talked about, you've got the triads, criminal gangs, working with the government of China.
Yeah.
And so to me, this is like an incredible revelation that we have fentanyl coming in here and it's backed by the Chinese government. I don't know if you can unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, I will back into your question by going to, you mentioned sources. And actually, after I wrote Willful Blindness, which was based on leaked BC government anti-money laundering documents that pointed to the main suspects in this activity. So that would include, street gangsters, who are members of international triads working together with Chinese security officials. And I'll unpack that later. But a U.S. State Department and, CIA consultant, DEA consultant type guy, very high level U.S. investigator official named David Asher had read my book. And he called me up and said, wow, you really nailed it there. And it turned out that he had been involved in investigations at the highest levels of organized crime in China and Hong Kong. So some of the people I had been writing about. And so he knew similar stuff as me. And, before I unpack the Vancouver model, I mean, very recently I did a story and he came out and said, if your listeners and viewers have seen the recent revelations about how TD Bank got slapped in the US with this $3 billion fine because they're laundering money for cartels and triads. David Asher was hinting at that case long ago to me. He couldn't disclose too much, but I had a good story recently where he said, look, that US case with TD being used, we knew, that is, US law enforcement intelligence, that the command and control calls for the US money laundering networks of the triads that are running this whole money laundering system for the Latin American cartels, they're being run out of Toronto. They're being run out of Vancouver. So again, I'll do my little network map. You got all these gangsters in the States laundering money through TD Bank, and the US government was following these calls up to Canada for the directors. And David Asher said, again, your government wasn't helpful on this. Essentially, Canada's wide open to Chinese transnational crime that's running this fentanyl money laundering operation, and you're not doing anything about it. So to back it up, what this system is about, again, China, this massive reservoir of wealth that has a $50,000 per year Communist Party limit on what any individual can export abroad. And yet it's a system of just tremendous corruption, unfortunately, top to bottom, that is directly due to how the Chinese Communist Party rules. And so, as I explain in the book, whether you're Xi Jinping's cousin, and this is a real fact, or you're a street gangster, you can get your money out into another country, let's just say Vancouver. In Z's cousin's case, it's Australia, through a casino junket. And so what that is, very simply, you go to a triad underground banker, you say, I've got $1 million in Shanghai, I'm going to put it into your triad bank, and I'll travel to Vancouver and you'll pay me out. So that's how I get around that Chinese Communist Party money wall. And so how that worked for the book and how I blew people's minds in Vancouver when I had the documents I could report is these gamblers, gangsters, tycoons, corrupt officials were arriving in Vancouver and getting hockey bags for our Canadian, all the Canadian list, hockey bags of money, $20 bills. This is straight drug cash. They can walk into the BC government casino and get their casino chips against all laws, all money laundering rules. So this is a government-run casino. So the government's turning a blind eye to that drug money laundering. Everyone's turning a blind eye.
Did they at least walk in with a hockey stick too, or just to try and at least hide it? Or they got 2 bags and then...
Well, in most cases, it would be like grocery bags. They'd have those big, roller suitcases, sometimes hockey bags. Never were they carrying a Cooper hockey stick to that item. But we laugh, but there are actual videos that the BC government had to produce after my news reports that showed in a comical way people just rolling suitcases of cash in, people unloading bales of dollar bills into casino cages, which, by the way, there are now similar images in Toronto Dominion Bank in New York, where a money launderer is dumping out his bales of cash. So that's how it happens. And just in a very simple way, I mean, I won't make it too complicated. It's very simply underground organized crime is facilitating this worldwide movement of drug money. And the key and the catch here, Mark, as you say, is the Chinese Communist Party, although they act like they're against crime, strategically, they're in on it because it's involved with, the fentanyl precursors that they want to move around the world to make money. It's evolved with some of their operations where they work with organized crime to try to corrupt, lesser states and use that financial influence
Like, is that what's motivating the Chinese Communist Party?
At a high level, this is sort of very new, and you can go to U.S. congressional hearings to prove this. It's not a whack job blogger just making this up. They are using organized crime to influence, South Pacific Islands, many Caribbean states, many Latin American and South American countries are, influenced top to bottom through this dirty money system. So again, that's a strategic way for China to, implement its influence using illicit, trillions of dollars. And you asked why Canada. Canada is acting, I think, like as if it's Panama, as if Mossack Fonseca was based in Toronto and Vancouver, which I believe you can say that the lawyers in Canada, unfortunately, are operating that way. A lot of them.
Yeah, it's just it's so unbelievable to me, Sam. Like and that's why we laugh. I think because like it's so hard to comprehend, and to understand that you have to. It's like a nervous laughter almost, right? Where to realize that, like, I don't know, we're like the Ned Flanders of the world, where we're just so meek and like, okay, you want to come in and I don't know, take my lawnmower and never give it back.
Yeah. Why don't you use my home to run your drug trafficking operation?
Yeah, well, exactly. And that's the part that's so dismaying, right? Is the drug I mean, all of it is, but especially the drug angle. So I guess, I've talked about this before that, China has like 100-year plan, which for people in democracies, we're used to maybe a 4-year plan, right? Or less. And it's like, what can we do to appease the populace in 4 years? And so we have very short-term thinking, but China has the benefit from their perspective of an authoritarian government that can implement a very long multi-generational plan. Mm-hmm. And part of that, I think, is, you've reported on, but it's, adding influence throughout the world, just through loaning money and funding projects and stuff. But where they can't do that, it's also destabilization, and especially destabilization of the U.S. I think that's kind of the point of the fentanyl trafficking, right? I believe that's the purpose, is to allow, and we see the effects, if you're in Vancouver especially, the effects of the fentanyl trafficking on our society, and we're just allowing it. We're just, because it's, I don't know, is it because it's funding election campaigns?
Yeah.
Maybe we should talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, to break down your point, I mean, this is something that I cautiously tested in the book. Is there a strategic purpose behind China turning a blind eye? Because they obviously have state control with an iron fist of those precursor factories, and yet this stuff's flooding the world. So my sources were suggesting, well, China actually wants it that way. So I kind of raised that theory, but said I couldn't prove it, but it's compelling, right? And there's enough smart and credible people in government that are saying, well, China doesn't seem to be stopping this. They're making a heck of a lot of money from it. Are they trying to attack us in a way? And, a few months ago, it came out in U.S. congressional hearings. Again, there had been investigations where they found in the American government that Beijing is actually incentivizing through value-added taxes these fentanyl precursor imports. And so they were letting people, as long as you don't deal that stuff in China, we'll help you with your proceeds around the world. So that's a key piece of evidence. And then you had people, you had William Barr, the former attorney general, a very serious person, Ray Donovan, former, head of the DEA, the guy that busted El Chapo, the guy that's been, leading these sort of TD Bank investigations. They were asked, is China, based on this evidence, what do you think? And they said, we believe, China wants to destabilize and hurt North Americans. They said Americans, but I've talked to these people, some of them, and they say, yeah, we're worried about Canada too. So yes, how much more evil could you get? If we're talking about an evil empire, to bring that, old phrase back, they want people in other states to die so they can destabilize them. This comes from the top of the US government. So, I mean, that's a grand strategy, as well as, taking over lesser states through dirty money, corruption, organized crime. Russia does it too. That's how they paved the way in Ukraine. So we're not just talking about China. But yes, my sourcing indicates that the people behind the Chinese election interference story, so these would be so-called community leaders in our diaspora who are actually gangster thugs that are empowered by Beijing, through means of, we'll let you do your activity. We might have a charge against you that will go away if you fulfill these objectives, which would be getting beside our politicians, donating to political leaders, very slowly and cleverly starting to influence Canadian policy. And I've asserted and reported that, yes, money that's donated to our parties, Chinese operations, does come from underground casinos and money laundering operations connected to very serious organized crimes. So that should include human trafficking, drug trafficking, and other crimes.
Yeah, it's oh man, there's there's just too much to cover here. I mean, you mentioned the underground casinos. We had an example of one in York region a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
and I think so Sam also has a podcast, folks. If you want to really dig into this stuff, it's the Bureau podcast, available on Spotify and everything else. Lots of great listening there. But you talked about this casino in York region where police came in and they were fully masked up, suited up so that nobody could see who they were for fear of retaliation. Did a raid and then found a whole lot more than they anticipated in the form of, like, not just, money for gambling and stuff and prostitution, evidence of that, but then also cameras and documents and dirt.
Yeah.
And, this is the classic honey trap thing. Dirt on presumably local politicians, or Canadians anyways. And somehow that all went away and they got their video footage, like, just ridiculous. They got their video footage back. And this speaks to what you're saying about we don't have the regulatory or legal framework to, like, I can't see this happening in the States. The FBI would be all over that site, immediately lock it down, and nobody would be getting their videotape evidence back, right?
No, absolutely. And I mean, to give some context, that story, for people that have been following the Globe and Mail or the Hogue Commission or NSI cop reports, without being falsely modest, sort of the big dump of information from government sources that risked their jobs and have been called criminal leakers by our Prime Minister this past week, came to me after reading Wilful Blindness and seeing that I had understood this attack on Canada from China and other states. And very key stories, in addition to those 11 MPs in Toronto that we talked about and other things, was that Markham area mansion of 52 rooms where human trafficking is occurring. And yes, CSIS, Canadian Intelligence, was informed that the police had raided the place, found pictures of politicians, found, sort of development plans with the suggestion that local politicians would be, involved in corruption. And there was the concern raised that CSIS had better look at what was on the tapes, because one of China's activities, which is well known in China, is you get people on tape in compromising positions, and this is a form of a leverage or influence. And to your point, a big point of that story, my sources indicated that Australia had told Canada that they had immaculate intelligence suggesting that one of their big Chinese influencers, a huge developer involved in massive donations to all parties, was a gangster working for China's secret police, and that Canada should know about this model. And so this Markham Casino mansion had been connected to China's security agencies and similar concerns. And yes, unlike the FBI or the Australian Federal Police or Australian intelligence, when CSIS tried to, get warrants to get this information, the case just fell apart very bizarrely, raising questions about how a police case that looked so solid could fall apart.
Yeah, it's just incredible. I encourage people to listen to some of those podcasts if they're interested in this for more details. So you're talking about some of the our international partners. We're part of the Five Eyes, so-called Five Eyes program. I mean, I think we're still a part of it. We've seen a waning of influence of Canada on the international stage. And, I just thought that was because of like Trudeau's focus on his socks or, woke policies or stuff like that. But really, I think what it comes down to is, I don't know, you tell me if I'm wrong, Sam, that people just don't trust us. And they know, I mean, you've reported on this as well, where FBI advises people not to go into Canada, like certain people, dissidents. They're not sharing intelligence with us anymore because they don't know where that intelligence is going to go. And they're just in general, they don't trust us because we don't take crime seriously. And I don't know. Does that sound accurate to you?
Yeah, that's completely accurate. And I mean, a clear example, Canadians or those that paid attention on Thanksgiving Monday, heard the RCMP come out and say, we have deep public safety concerns that Indian intelligence and going to the highest levels of the Indian government are using organized crime to target, maybe extremists or maybe, in some cases not in Canada. There's a big concern there. And I've reported this morning for the Bureau. It's a U.S. government Drug Enforcement Administration FBI case that has provided the evidence that allowed our Prime Minister and the RCMP to come out and say these things. In Canada, we wouldn't have been able to prove, those cases. And it's still an ongoing investigation. But yes, I've been told that whether it's the FBI at this point, CIA, other intelligence agencies in Australia, United Kingdom, and America have definitely downgraded Canada's trustworthiness. So there's we're still in the Five Eyes, but there's we're very much downgraded. And I've never been partisan. When Mr. Trudeau came in 2015, 2016, I was very agnostic. I was, okay, this is a scion of a great statesman, as I thought at the time. Let's see what he does. But look, he's been mocked by other world leaders for talking to them about his socks in a narcissistic way. He's not taken seriously, and I think it could be a lot more nefarious than that. In fact, I think there's strong evidence that he and his senior people have turned a blind eye to China's supporting, especially the Liberal Party, but, the influence of China trying to target all politicians and other hostile states. They've been allowed to run wild in Canada. And he will say the opposite, and indeed did testify the opposite. But I strongly suggest the evidence is against him on that.
So are we too far gone now as a country? Like, where do we go from here? I'm just thinking, like, this is pretty a dark picture, and it seems like Canada's kind of at the bottom of the pit, so to speak.
It is. And, there's a lot of people asking that question. I'm asking it myself. If I'm being really honest, sometimes I think I'll just level up with you guys and your listeners. Like, because of my reporting after I went to testify in Parliament, a couple days later, an RCMP National Security Unit knocked on my door. And they said they had a duty to warn me that my activities had raised a serious threat against me. I'm glad there's people in Canada that when they found out, they're praying for me. But though that shocked me, obviously, because a duty to warn is what the Prime Minister and the RCMP just went public with, the other day, saying that, they're afraid that people that India sees as extremists or maybe connected to organized crime or whatever are facing death possibly in Canada. So look, I don't see how anyone could argue that Canada is is sort of in a great position right now. And I have had to think, is this my calling? Am I going to keep going, or am I going to face these threats? Or maybe my friends south of the border would be more welcoming or something like that. But that's my personal view. And I do think there's I'm optimistic that if, we as a nation, as you guys said at the start, we have so much capacity. It's about stewarding it the right way. I don't think it's being stewarded the right way now, but like I said, if Japan realized that the Yakuza was becoming an unofficial government, they made laws making it illegal to be a Yakuza. So if you want to really stop a problem, you can do it. And Canada can turn it around, I believe. But the problem here is there's a lot of people in elite positions that not just my research, a lot of research suggests that there's a lot of rich and powerful Canadians that don't want things to change. And I think that's the real hurdle now.
So one of the things you were talking about earlier was real estate. And I'm wondering if you're like these elite people who don't want things to change, is that because of, hey, I got some assets here, I got this, I want to protect that, this is my interest, this is my future. And I wonder how far that trickles down, because we're both in the real estate space, investing and whatnot, and like we're pretty keen to watch, like, okay, where are values going over the next 20 years? And for the average person, like real estate in Canada is kind of a vehicle to store your wealth, right?
Yeah.
So do you see that kind of changing or being disrupted, or?
My own view on that is, this is a big boat with tremendous capacity, tremendous resources, and our human resources up there, probably the most important. Remember, we created Nortel before China stole the IP. BlackBerry, we lost that somehow. We're a great nation, but we're not protecting it and stewarding it in the right way. So yeah, you don't want your real estate market to crash. At the same time, we can't support fentanyl money laundering, holding those prices up. So you got to, in my view, turn the boat, judiciously and look 20, 30, 50 years ahead. Do we want our sovereignty? How do we get there? Well, not killing sources of revenue overnight. So that's that. But to your question, yeah, I do believe, I know at the high end, real estate developers, law firms, politicians that would be implicated, any academic universities have a major stake in all of this. There's a lot of people that don't want it to change because, they've got their assets that they think they're walled off and fine, and really digging down into these dirty and troubling problems that make you sad when you read my stories. No one likes that, but what's, in my view, that's two parts of my answer. One, it's something that we have to do to be good stewards, and we'll simply lose our sovereignty if we don't. That's just going to happen. Two, yeah, there's very powerful people that don't have those same principles at heart that I think are against these changes.
But I mean, it's like they say, sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? Bringing these things to light is the first step. And I mean, that's what you're doing. And I can't overstate this for our listeners as well. Like Sam Cooper is a national treasure, and we're just a couple of guys talking on a podcast here. But but it's true. Without your reporting, I don't think a lot of this, like I know, Global and Globe and Mail have done some reporting, but I think it's been prompted by your work. Like, I don't think without your reporting, a lot of this would have come to light. I honestly don't. And I don't know, like everything that I've seen around this all of this foreign interference, like all of this, I think has been prompted in part by you, right? And it's amazing, like what one person or a couple people can do in a country. And so, yeah, like I said, the first step I think is just knowing what's out there. And that's part of why we wanted to get you on the podcast. Not that we have, millions of listeners, but, the more people that just say, like, put their hands up and say, guys, this is a problem. Like, let's get some awareness here. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Sam.
Well, I thank you for that. And I mean, to your point, a lot of days aren't fun for me when I think about, just put it, the forces that are in the opposition. But the more I think about it, I do give credit to my upbringing, or there's something in my nature that, if I think something's right, and I don't always get it right, but if I think something's right and important, I'm just going to keep going. I don't like to be pushed off something. And, part of this, I credit my father, his parents, who are from the prairies, for some reason, as he tells me, they sent him to a school in Switzerland, which he says he was the poorest person there. It's called the School of Kings, and Asian dictators were there with him. And so he got a lot of insight into, I would say, like some elites and how the world works, different, money, that kind of thing. And then he just kind of like went on a different path and decided to become a Christian minister. And so I got some teachings from the Bible and some teachings about the world. And maybe I'm just kind of jamming them together now and trying to find a path.
Yeah, sticking to what's right, even though, maybe tempting to kind of cave. It's a tough battle, ongoing.
So,
encourage you.
Sam, I want to at some point maybe talk about some possible solutions, but there's a few more specifics I wanted to talk about first. Well, okay, number one, like personal security. I don't know if you want to talk about that, but like you've had now. I mean, you're no dummy, so you know that people probably don't appreciate what you're doing, and you've had even actually a warning from the RCMP. Somehow that memo, made its way where it needed to go, and you got the warning.
Yeah.
And I've heard you, I think you've said on other podcasts, I'm not strapped, but I know people who are.
Yeah.
Like, is this a day-to-day concern for you? You worried?
It's not day to day. Like I, since working in Vancouver, I've been aware of, counter surveillance or, keeping my eyes out, personal and home security. And I don't have a weapon, but, I'm physically trained and I'm, cautious, but I'm being public about it. I've made that decision through guidance and counseling that, being public about what I do and that I did receive, a serious warning. I think Canadians want to know that, and anyone that would have bad thoughts should know that a lot of people already have their eyes on me and don't want me to be hurt. But yeah, I did say that I know people that have been overseas and, have protected politicians, are licensed to carry, and all these things that I can call pretty quickly if need. Well, they'll be there. I don't have people around me, but I have networks that are aware of my situation. So, I mean, I didn't want this to occur, but it's something that I consider and balance.
Yeah. And we're in Canada, folks, just to underline that. So, okay, another item that just caught my attention. We have a new director of CSIS, Daniel Roberts. And so I don't know anything about, I wasn't able to, I'm not an investigative journalist, so I was not able to uncover anything. The only thing I noticed is that, like, that guy is young, man. Like, does he just look young, or, like, where's he from? What's the scoop?
We're thinking along the same lines. I would like to be very fair to the person. I see that he's from the Communications Security Establishment, so that's Canada's signals agency. He does appear to be to the younger side. I don't know his age, let's just say he looks around, 40-ish. He appears to be very intelligent. So, as you may imagine, I used to be able to talk to some people, but after the Prime Minister calls them criminal leakers, maybe they're not going to be there on the other end of the phone or for me to ask questions. So I don't know how he's seen. Mr. Rogers, Dan Rogers, is seen within CSIS. My impression from who he was sitting beside at the Hogue Commission, people that were completely minimizing what has occurred, and essentially arguing. So these would be senior Trudeau government officials that, despite these reports, we don't have people that are really colluding that badly with foreign states in our parliament, or maybe Bill Blair's office, didn't do such a bad job with this, surveillance warrant on a Liberal Party fundraiser and power broker. So by Mr. Rogers sitting beside those people, look, honestly, I've got a question in my mind. Is he a Trudeau pick? And again, I said, I want to be very fair to that person, because it may be the case that he's the best person. But where we are, I need to be a little questioning.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I was thinking too. I'm like, is he old enough to have been in Trudeau's wedding party?
I don't have any indications that, like Trudeau ministers, he's a friend from McGill. So no.
Let's just say, Mark, you look much older than him.
Thanks, Brent. Thank you. I am.
We always joke about
I am.
Mark's age.
Okay, maybe we could just talk a little bit about Trudeau's been on the stand at the Hague Commission and has delivered some, I don't know, explosive testimony or nonsense testimony, whatever way you want to look at it. But I mean, it's come out that the government received 163 warnings about Chinese influence, something like that. We've got all these memos. We don't have time to get into it, but memos that he didn't see, or that his aides, some of them got missed, and, maybe some fell into the shredder and some didn't make it to him. I don't believe I don't have anything to lose here, so I can say I don't believe it. I think he knew about it, but and now he's on the offensive, saying I know names of Conservative MPs, and then also the whole India thing I think could have been handled differently, and is I think it's just a distraction to show that he's tough on foreign interference. And it's like, well, what about China? You said you didn't know any of this stuff, and now all of a sudden you seem to know some stuff. What was where was I going with this? I had a question, but
I would agree with how you perceived his testimony. Yeah, it was very selective, very self-serving, and it was very conflicted with the government strategy before he got on the stand. Was, yes, a lot of memos, we claim they didn't get up to Mr. Trudeau or his aides, which, like you, I don't believe. It was very clear that, there was I would say, a studied plan to not act on warnings regarding China. And so the government was minimizing everything. And then suddenly when Mr. Trudeau gets on the stand, after the RCMP comes clean and says, we believe organized crime is being used to destabilize our communities, which is serious, and I believe true, that, it suddenly comes out. And then now suddenly, as you've said, Mr. Trudeau is saying, I have the names of a number of people on the opposition party involved in this. And I think he's right about that. There definitely are concerns, because my documents say all the three big parties have vulnerabilities to these countries: China, India, also Pakistan, Iran would be in there. For some reason, Russia is more interested in the United States. Most of this is targeted at our diasporas. That's the way foreign interference works in Canada. But yes, Trudeau made India into a big deal, and it is a big deal, but China, which is his personal vulnerability, is orders of magnitude the bigger deal. And that's what he and his top aides are covering up.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see the messaging change, from sort of like, no, there's no issue, there's no problem, to like, okay, so there was, there were some minor problems, and Trudeau even said the name Han Dong. And for those who don't know, this was essentially a riding nomination process that was corrupted by China, which essentially the government is now admitting to after having denied it many, many times. But anyways, the messaging is like, no, this is just like normal diplomacy. This is what countries do. And there's a little bit of truth, right? Yeah, countries are always messing around in other countries. But this, China's doing is not normal. And it's just, it's interesting to see that sort of the messaging. So I don't know, for people who don't really know, like, oh, okay, I guess this, China interfering, this is just normal. I mean, everybody does it, right?
Yeah, no, that's you've hit on the key point. Like what the China's United Front is they take the Chinese Communist Party and they implant the party within communities in other countries. And so now these communities, the diasporas, are the first to be targeted and co-opted, threatened, leveraged. So then the community members become the insulation or proxies that are used to surround our politicians. And so China will look at a Kenny Chiu in British Columbia or a Michael Chan in Ontario, who are loud and proud about saying human rights abuses or, what's happening in Hong Kong is wrong. Those MPs are targeted by Chinese intelligence and diplomats who are not real diplomats and community leaders who are not leaders but gangsters. And, media stories start to attack them, say they're racist, or maybe, a fake affair will come out, or, all kinds of incredible ways to attack the people China doesn't want and support the ones that it does want, who will be voices, secret voices for Chinese policy in parliament. That's what it's all about. And the Trudeau government has said all these intelligence reports that we got talking about this United Front system, it's normal diplomacy. If we're negotiating with the United States, our diplomats will do a little research on theirs and, talk to them at the party. Okay, yeah, that's true. But do you secretly fund them? Do you send them a honeypot so a news story can come out and do you send Chinese secret police? And this is a real case. Do you send Chinese secret police to hire American private eyes and thugs and say, this guy that was against the Tiananmen Square and is running for an office in New York, maybe he could have a car crash. Maybe he could be hurt. Maybe we can put a woman in his campaign and get some compromising activity. So I think that, whenever I have to explain what's really going on, relying on U.S. justice, can devastate any arguments that Mr. Trudeau or his senior officials that are carrying water for him can just wipe them off the map because they're lying.
What motivates our government officials to do these things and to be like, I guess anyone can be vulnerable, but and if you say, hey, I have the interests of Canada at heart, I want to build a great country, we elect you into power, and now, you're getting paid or you're getting, some sort of kickback from Chinese government. Like, do they want to live in China? Do they want Canada to be China? Like, what do they just want to be wealthy and then go move somewhere else? Like, if you're turning Canada into a very difficult place, like, why would, I don't know, what motivates people to do that?
Yeah, no, I do have some insight. I mean, the more I learn, the more I get sad before I write this stories, because it's a lot dirtier than we were raised to believe. I've learned that even on a domestic basis, the way you become a nominee for a party, even if a foreign government isn't involved, can be very dirty. And, Canadians just don't know this, that we really do need a real look into our democracy, top to bottom. But as for China, they're just their strategy is just flood. They don't care if these stories come out, about them being caught, because it's their proxies that are in the spotlight. It's not the real powerful people in Beijing. And they just, in my experience, they send people at our candidates constantly from all directions and all angles. And, I've never seriously considered being a politician, but it's not an easy job, because bad people, as well as a lot of good people, the job is glad handing and being around crowds. So, it's easy to get a gangster beside you in a photo, and that doesn't make you guilty. But when you start to have my knowledge that that gangster is there at the direction of a foreign government, and, it's happening in the U.S. too, it's happening everywhere, then you start to understand why people, I think the real answer to your question is, again, The New York mayor, Eric Adams, who allegedly is funded by foreign governments, the indictments say he texted to an aide, it's all about campaign financing. Everything else is just fluff. So there's the answer. Again, follow the money.
So for him, he's self-interested. He wants to get in power, or he wants money. But, you know, you have lots of money at the end of the day, and you live in a society that's completely, like you mentioned before, we lose our sovereignty, right? Like Canada's losing sovereignty. You know, do you want to live in a society like that, even if you're in power? I don't know.
I mean, politicians...
Like, you're not going to be in power forever. You're going to have a bunch of money, but you got to cave to other people's direction.
I mean, without being too broad, there's a lot of good politicians, but I don't think I'm being unfair by saying a lot of people that get into it aren't thinking long-term principles.
Right.
So, Brent, I got a great paper you got to read.
Okay.
This is kind of funny. So,
did you write it?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Very quick aside. Back in grade 12, I was I always have been interested in espionage. And so I wrote, I don't know, it was for English or something, but, you know, like the reasons that people spy. And I came up with 4 reasons. The acronym was MICE: money, ideology, compromise, and ego. And, I mean, I haven't been proved wrong yet. So maybe it's time to republish that. But,
Yeah.
I mean, that's essentially, you start with the money, but then you get compromised, right? You get photographs taking the money. Or sorry, Sam, go ahead.
No, and that's a great acronym. And in my experience, ideology just doesn't seem to come into it that much. It's mostly money, ego, and those compromising activities.
Well, I was in grade 12 a long time ago, Sam, so people still believed in stuff back then. So just quickly, we got to wrap up, but quickly, like what are some of the solutions, Sam? You referred to the RICO legislation in the States. I think that's probably a great place to start. Well, I mean, first of all, we need to unearth more of this. We need to know more. It has to come to light. I don't know, you know, with security, what seems like a security establishment and a federal police establishment that is enthralled to a federal government. I don't know how much of that will happen. So it's going to depend on people like you, but we need this to come out. And then, like, what do we need after that? Legislation? Is that a good place to start, Sam?
Yeah, legislation. I mean, in my book, again, I'm not a lawyer. I've worked with them a lot, and at one point, you know, wanted to study to be one. But some way bringing together that anti-organized crime racketeering law, so we can tackle these transnational mafias that have set up in Canada, of all places, because we're so weak. And if you can roll that type of law together with a state-sponsored, you know, crime law that gives Canada, you know, we were a kinder and gentler society, but it's become, unfortunately, you know, a weakness. So we need some tough laws that, you know, if you're working for a foreign state and organized crime, you get hit with the hammer. And they've started to look at, you know, them. There's another thing that's come out in the inquiry is they knew about this problem. They were studying so-called hostile state actor laws, but the government just didn't go ahead with them. And, you know, you can guess why. So it starts with political will, strong laws, real sentences, and really we can learn from the United States and Australia, who have already figured this out. We don't have to lose what makes us Canadian and being kinder and gentler, but we won't be a kinder, gentler society if foreign organized crime is running it as it's starting to now.
Willful sight instead of willful blindness.
Yes.
Well, I mean, it's a little bit like the Marshall Doctrine, right? Which, you know, is a bit of a joke now, but, you know, walk softly and carry a big stick. We can be nice, we can be gentle, but don't mess with us.
Yes.
You know?
I like that. That's a favorite thought. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, Sam, we got to wrap up here. I would love to talk to you for hours, but we'll keep this to an hour. Where can people find you, support you? I don't know, disagree with you?
Yeah, you can do all of those. You can go to thebureau.news. So that's my new investigative platform brand. So just Google thebureau.news. It's platformed on Substack. And you can subscribe. I've got 12,000 now, which is really, you know, I'm meeting my expectations and more in just over a year. hopefully you can become a paying subscriber, and then you can be in those message boards and you can disagree with me or agree with me. I'll be in there chatting. That's the main one. That's what's allowing me to, keep my family housed. But you could also find me on Twitter with @ScooperCooper, which was, Sam Cooper email address way back when I signed up for it. I think it was in 2009, and I'll do some commentary there, but that's not paying the bills. So go to the Bureau first.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you're a criminal leaker, then where do we go?
Yeah, no, you can
give you a call.
You can find my number if you go to the Bureau's website,
okay.
And we'll start with the phone, and then we'll go to secure.
Okay.
Awesome, Sam. It has been so great talking to you. Thank you so much for your time. I wish you all the best in your work, and I look forward to chatting again maybe sometime. If you're not so big and famous, you can still talk to a couple of lowly podcasters.
Oh, for sure, Mark and Brent. It's been my pleasure.
I encourage you to keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, well, thanks to our listeners for making it this far. And we'll talk to you again, folks. But until next time,
steward your wealth wisely. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Two Stewards Show. If you like my voice better, click subscribe.
And if you like my voice better, click share.
If you like both, give us a 5-star rating.
To interact with the show, feel free to reach out at hello@twostewards.ca.
We'll see you in the next episode. In the meantime, steward your wealth wisely.